Star Wars Tabletop Gaming is proudly supported by Gatekeeper Games, your key to gaming unplugged. A tabletop games store offering a friendly atmosphere for people to buy and play their games in the north of Fitzroy. Welcome to episode 16 of Star Wars Tabletop Gaming. Today we're going to discuss the latest article to come out from FFG. That is the article named Pitched Battle. This one is the latest to come out and it discusses the combat mechanics, including close combat and shooting. It talks about suppression and courage values. It goes into damage for vehicles and also talks about leaders and some extra things that we didn't know about leaders. So in case you haven't had a chance to read the article or are interested on my thoughts on it, I thought I'd put together a quick video discussing everything involved. This is exciting because it's confirmed a few mechanics that we had only kind of heard rumors about, especially for me the suppression, which is quite different to how we originally thought. But starting off, we're going to talk about combat. So we know how the combat works because of how all the demos we've seen. But in case you haven't religiously watched these demos from Gen Con and other conventions and are curious, let me put it down for you. So for each unit you have, each model within that unit gets one of the dice from their weapons. In this case, each Stormtrooper gets one white dice. They have a bunch of symbols on them, in this case, hit, critical, and surge. We roll these dice, and whatever comes up is what you do. So here we have a hit and a surge. Now, because Stormtroopers have an offensive surge, that surge turns into a hit. Other units have defensive and offensive. Other units have offensive to crits instead of hits, so on and so forth. So in this case, the Stormtroopers, from all their white dice that they've rolled, have done 2 hits. Now, if they had an aim token, for instance, they could re-roll 3 of them because of a precise special rule. But let's say they didn't, and in this case, they get their 2 hits on the Rebel Troopers, which is pretty good because white dice are rubbish. So the Rebel Troopers take up their defensive dice. For the Rebel Troopers, that is a white dice, whereas it's a red dice for the Stormtroopers. And they roll defensive dice equal to the amount of hits or crits that the Stormtroopers got. In this case, they would be rolling 2 dice equal to the 2 hits. They roll their 2 dice, and all they get is a defensive surge. Luckily for the Rebel Troopers, they do have a defensive surge to block value, and so they get 1 block, only allowing 1 hit to go through, which, because of their 1 wound threshold, takes out miniature. And that is combat. Hopefully that makes sense. As I play games, when it actually comes out, I'll go into it further. But now I want to talk about suppression. So suppression works a little differently to how we originally thought. The way it works is that when you take suppression, you only take suppression tokens, I should firstly say, when the opponent actually gets a hit or a crit. So they don't have to just shoot near you, they actually have to hit you, which is good, as it should be. So in this case, the Rebel Troopers have just taken their 2nd suppression token from being shot at by 2 units. And what that means is that their courage value has been equaled and exceeded, so that they are now suppressed. Suppression happens when your courage value, that's the yellow number there, is equal to or greater than with suppression tokens. Suppressed means you can only take 1 action, but apparently it does help out your cover. We don't quite know how. Now, if you take suppression tokens greater than twice your courage value, so that's 3 suppression tokens on trooper units, you actually break and flee, which is really cool, and means that suppression will be super important in the game. Breaking and flee means the only action you may take is 1 move action towards the closest battlefield edge. Other things you can do in regards to suppression is that you can actually take an action to get rid of suppression tokens, specifically. How you do that, or how many it takes away, I'm not entirely sure, but we'll find out. And the other one, of course, is that at the end of the turn, a suppression token is removed. So suppression is going to be a really key part of the game for locking down trooper units, especially when it comes to capturing objectives. So keep that in mind when thinking about how good units are. The article also discusses close combat. In this case, little things that we may or may not have known is that enemy units, when they're charged, can move as many miniatures as possible into base contact. Units cannot be shot into or out of close combat, and units can also retreat from close combat. Retreating being just a simple 1 move away using both your actions to do so, which means you're no longer engaged and both units can be shot at. So that'll be very important for opening up units for kind of getting ambushed and whatnot. And it's good to know that units are protected while they're in close combat. Alrighty, that's all of that. Next up, let's talk about damage on vehicles. So this is really cool. So Fantasy Flight have decided to take some mechanics we've seen recently in other games, such as kind of Age of Sigmar and the new 40k, in that vehicles aren't invincible until they're destroyed. Once their resilience threshold is reached, that is that little orange cog symbol that we see on their cards, we'll look at them a little later, they get one of these values. How exactly that happens, we're not entirely sure, but I think you roll a dice and whatever comes up on that, you get one of these. So we have weapon destroyed, disabled, and damaged. Now, weapon destroy is pretty self-explanatory. One of your weapons is destroyed. So this is a really good reason to take extra weapons on things like your ATSTs, because if you've only got one cannon and you roll up this result, you're pretty much useless. You're just stomping around and trying to get into close combat at that stage. Disabled, I believe, is to do with movement. Let's have a good proper look. Disabled. You suffer movement restrictions, that's all it said. And then it is damaged, which locks you down into just one action. So that will be significant, reaching that resilience threshold to kind of make vehicles less dangerous, I guess. And I think it's a really important mechanic. So I just want to talk about the vehicles that we have here. These were the ones we first found out about in the core set. Now, if you look at the speeder bikes, they do not have a resilience threshold because they've only got 3 wounds. So there's no real point, there's no real necessity. AT-RT only has a resilience threshold of 4. So once they get 4 damage on them, noting that it is harder to damage vehicles, they're going to be rolling up on the table and getting maybe a weapon destroyed, disabled, or damaged result. Weapon destroyed would obviously be crippling for an AT-RT as they've only got 1 weapon. So keep that in mind that your vehicles aren't as resilient as you first suspected. The ATST and Speeder are both far more resilient, or at least the ATST is. The Airspeeder only has a resilience value of 5, with its health being 7. So once it's got 5 damage, it's rolling up on this table. And the ATSD has a resilience value of 8. So that's pretty powerful, as it should be as well. If its resilience value was down in the 5 and 6 mark, then it may as well just be as weak as an airspeeder. So I think they're all pretty spaced out, but it's good to see that vehicles aren't going to be invincible until they lose their last wound. They're going to be taking damage, and random things are going to be happening to them, which reduces their effectiveness. Next up, let's talk about the leaders. So we've found out that leaders actually use their courage values to support troops around them. I'm not entirely sure on the distance of that support, but I'm guessing it will be range 1, maybe range 2 if we're lucky, probably not range 3. And essentially troop units, let's see exactly the words that it uses and see if that gives us a hint. What's more, your commanders have a stabilizing influence on the troopers that they lead into battle. So long as a commander like Darth Vader, interesting, is nearby, your troopers can use the commander's courage value instead of their own when they would become panicked, letting you use your commanders to keep your troops in the fight. Now, Darth Vader doesn't have a courage value. So the articles specifically mention Darth Vader, and maybe that means troops around him are immune to suppression, which seems immensely powerful and might be a mistake of the article. Whereas Luke, of course, with this courage value of 3, means that all the troops around him are going to have a courage value of 3, which is excellent and immense. So leaders are even better than we thought they were. They're not just beat sticks. They're using their courage value very significantly to keep troops moving, which is a great reason to take a second leader. I didn't previously see a great reason, besides maybe if your main one got cut down. But having another leader, even Veers with his courage value of 2, being on the battlefield, means that having a courage value of 2 means it's going to take 5 suppression tokens before your unit breaks and flees, as opposed to 3, which is a real difference. And it's going to mean your troops are staying where you want them to, and moving forward as well onto objectives. And as we've seen, because of the missions, we know that objectives are going to be the main way that you win games. All right. A lot to talk about. I got there. All in all, I think this is all really positive stuff. What it's looking up to be is that Legion's looking like a really tactical, strategic game in the way your troops are moving about the battlefield, the way you're allocating damage to vehicles, the way you're moving your hits around to cause suppression on units that it really matters. So I think there's going to be a lot of really great decision making happening on the tabletop with Legion, and this article has made me even more excited to play it. So, thank you very much for watching. See you next time, and may the Force be with you.